Hi, welcome to the small shed. This week we're going to be looking at some blast gates for the dust extract system, and that's coming up next. To the small shed. A quick apology for the video cock up last couple of weeks ago. I let out a couple of dust extract videos that had been parked up on YouTube waiting for me to alter the date to the right time. I thought there were some weeks in the future, but actually they were 2 weeks ago. So they came out on a Saturday rather than a Friday. Sorry about that, and it means that this video doesn't actually follow on the week after, but hopefully you'll get over that. We're going to move on now with the actual dust extract blast gates. Now, having put the dust extraction in last week, the actual duct work, that's left me with 4 or 5 4-inch pipes which are effectively open to the atmosphere, and that's not much use when you want to connect a 4-inch vacuum to it, because it'll be sucking away at all the ones that haven't got anything connected. So I need some means of shutting off the flow in and out of those openings, and there's 1 or 2 things I've been going through in the past few weeks, well, in months indeed, and I think I'm up to about the 5th iteration of what I was trying to do. So I'm just going to run through now how it developed into what I'm using at the moment, and we'll see whether it works once I get the vacuum done. As usual with these things, I'd started off not really having much idea of what I wanted to do, and it's probably a measure of how unprepared I was that you'll see the difference between what I started off designing and what I've ended up with. They're totally different altogether. Originally I was going to use some of the pieces of junction for the ducting to make a square inline sliding valve effectively, and that was mocked up with card and masking tape. It's quite often useful just to mock these things up first. The principle looked fine. Not too sure that in hindsight it would have probably worked that well, because you tend to get a lot of dust and dirt in the slides if you're not careful, and when you push it down to close it, there's stuff at the bottom that you can't get out. So I then moved on to a second idea effectively, which was a revolving piece of plastic or something of that nature. I didn't know what I was going to use, that would actually sit inside the outlet. One of the problems with the previous design was that it was going to take up quite a lot of room for the actual slide out part, and I thought that if I could put something that slid across the opening, it would then be all internal, and you can see there that there's just a rotating pin, and with a bolt on it through it or something like that. Again, I wasn't really sure. I was going through the bits box and getting all sorts of screws and washers that I could use, but the intention was that the whole thing was internal and didn't take up any more room than the outlet itself. So we drilled that to suit. I think they're 8mm, something like that, and fixed up, rigged up some sort of system as a test. It's usually worth spending a bit of time with these sort of things if you don't know what you're doing, just mocking something up to see where the problems lie, because it's quite often it's only when you've done it that you realise that there's a fundamental flaw in your design, but certainly don't want to waste a lot of time on the finished article if it's fundamentally flawed. That seemed to be okay. The principle was fine, but again I was worried that the suction on that panel would pull the gate inwards when you've got the vacuum on and render all the other ones as not much use at all. So further work back to the drawing board, or in this case the fibre, it's foam core board that I use, and that seemed to indicate that if I put a couple of pieces of perspex or plastic, whatever I was going to use for the finished job, on the inside as a runner for that gate to run into, it would stop it coming backwards, and that seemed to work okay. So I then thought, well, I might as well make some decent templates. Now we've got the bits and pieces to do it with, and then that way with some MDF templates I could then router the pieces, and not only would they all be the same size, it would at least mean that it was quicker to make them. So I started off just making the piece that would fit inside the blast gate. This will eventually be polycarbonate or perspex, I'm not sure which. The gate itself was slightly altered in shape, a little bit more elegant in that it then came fully out of the way when it was open, and fitted okay. I think these, you can get a 4-inch blast gate for a few pounds, so it's not, if it doesn't work and the rest of the system does, I'm at least not too much out of time or pocket, because this didn't cost anything much, and it didn't take a huge amount of time to do. Now I've roughed out all the blanks for the parts for the blast gates. I've used some polycarbonate that's scrap and just roughly scored the shape of the template on, and they'll be cut out on the bandsaw slightly larger than the actual size needed, and I can put the template onto that with double-sided tape and then router the shape. And that's the 4 sets of components all cut. Normally I'd have built one set to try out and make sure the design worked, but cutting this stuff is such a messy business. I thought I'd cut them all out in one go and save a bit of clearing up. Time now just to get one of the templates mounted onto the MDF, onto the polycarbonate. Cut them out, just put a bit of double-sided on, burnish it down. Peel off the backing, probably the hardest bit, I think. And set the polycarbonate on the template. Just a little bit of gap all the way around the edge. Push them on hard. And it's ready to route. Safety glasses on. Vacuum on. This is the first time really, other than the bowl challenge I did some time ago, that I've used the router much. They are wonderful tools. After that, fitted the pieces of plastic with some metal inserts to take the threaded rod. These are the ones that push through with 4 spikes on them, and then I've just filed the end off them to allow them to be flush with the perspex. At this stage I hadn't got the hole drilled for the outlet itself because I was waiting for some parts to come as usual from China. I've got a hole cutter on order, but as usual these things take 4 or 5 weeks to come if they're travelling by normal means, but that in itself shows the principle of it. Then it was time to glue on the guides. I've used a plastic weld type material glue for that I use for the railway modelling. Just melts the perspex. Really the ideal thing to use is chloroform, but it's not that easily available. It's alright if you know somebody in medical circles, but you can't generally walk. They look at you slightly oddly if you walk into a shop and ask for a bottle of chloroform. They wonder what you're up to. So it's not something I can get just like that. This is the circle cutter I got. It looks a bit more like an X-wing fighter than a cutter, but there are 2 rotating pieces that just take that centre out. Right, so it's time to put the Mark 1 blast gate together, see how it works. Can't even test it yet until I get the cyclone itself working, but we'll see what we can do. Really this probably wants sealing in, but at the moment I'll try it with some super glue. If it works on the Mark 2s and 3s and 4s we can improve on the sealing, but I don't think there'll be a major problem. A bit of accelerator in there. Then that piece goes inside and goes on like that. It's grabbed straight away. No, it hasn't. Let's put that in position. So that's the gate in operation now, in place as the Mark 1, and as I say, until I get the cyclone working it's difficult to know how it'll perform, but it certainly seems to be easy enough. I'll just put a knob or a handle onto that arm, and it needs a couple of stops to stop it going too far back either way, but that'll be open and it gives you a clear 4-inch opening, and that's closed and that shuts it up fairly flush. I don't think there's any air, there's going to be a lot of air leakage there. It's got retaining behind the perspex so it won't get pulled in, so I'm hoping that will be a successful operating gate, but we'll try the first one and then we'll move on if that one's successful and put the other 4 in. Well, I hope that was of interest. As I said towards the end of the video, I've still got to do a lot of fettling and make the other blast gates up once I know this one works, but there's no point in making 5 more or 4 more if this one is a failure. So we'll see how that beds in, and I can do a follow-up on the installation, just tidying up all the joints when I know where everything fits. That all depends on getting the vacuum in and running. That's coming up next. So next week we start off with the actual vacuum part itself, where I'm modifying an existing record power vacuum. So I look forward to seeing you then. If you like the video, please press like, subscribe, all the usual stuff, and I'll see you next week. Bye.